Judge George Wythe is not a founding father we hear too much about, but he was among the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and he was a mentor to Thomas Jefferson. Wythe is described as the father of American jurisprudence. On May 25th, 1806, his maid Lydia Broadnax brought him breakfast of eggs, toast, sweetbread, and coffee. She then went downstairs and had a cup of coffee herself, along with Wythe's latest protege, 16-year-old Michael Brown. She soon fell ill along with the other two. The best doctors in the area came to investigate and diagnosed all of them with cholera. Judge Wythe declared, "I am murdered." Recently, Wythe threatened to cut his grandnephew, 18-year-old George Wythe Sweeney, out of his will. Sweeney was a notorious gambler who would frequently steal and sell books from his great uncle and forge checks in his name. That morning, he insisted that Broadnax make him toast before bringing Wythe his breakfast. Well, she did. She watched Sweeney pour himself a cup of coffee, and then he seemed to tamper with the pot a bit. He slipped a piece of paper into it. Sweeney quickly ate his breakfast, downed his coffee, and was out the door. When Sweeney attempted to cash a check with Wythe's name on it for $100, he was arrested. On June 1st, Michael Brown succumbed to his illness. On the second, weak and grieving, Wythe called his lawyer. Sweeney was officially written out of the will. He also refused to pay his grandnephew's $1,000 bail. By the 8th, he too was dead. Broadnax was the only one to recover from her illness. Investigations uncovered a white powder hidden under Sweeney's bed. They also found a few pieces of paper coated in white powder in the garden just a few feet from the wall of the jail where Sweeney was being held. It was determined that the powder in both instances was arsenic. A friend of Sweeney's, Taylor Williams, stated that Sweeney had recently asked him about poison. Assuming that he wanted to kill rats, Williams recommended ratsbane, which is an arsenic-based poison. The mayor, William Duval, stated that he too had found white powder in the judge's shed. And two carpenters said that they watched as Sweeney ground something into a powder using an axe near the shed. Despite what seemed like a plethora of damning information, the defense team was able to pick apart the case. First, the team of doctors, which again included the greatest doctors available in the area, failed to do a thorough examination of either Brown or Wythe. They determined that because both victims' stomachs were inflamed and filled with bile, it was consistent with arsenic poisoning. But they failed to check for inflammation of the heart and lungs, which would occur from arsenic poisoning. They failed to look for conjunctivitis in the eyes. They failed to look for a blackened penis, all of which would indicate arsenic poisoning. They failed to run any of the standard chemical tests known to determine arsenic at the time. In addition to this, arsenic was a common rat poison. It wasn't unusual to find arsenic in someone's shed or elsewhere in the house because rats were a problem. To make matters worse, neither Lydia Broadnax, who witnessed Sweeney slip the paper into the coffee pot, or those two carpenters that watched him grind the powder were allowed to testify. Why? Because they were black. Black people could not testify against white people at the time. 3 decades earlier, Jefferson and Wythe revised the Virginia Code, at which point they addressed the legal status of blacks in America, their rights in the courts, and called for the emancipation of slaves. All requests were denied. It would take another 60 years before blacks were allowed to testify in Virginia courts. George Wythe Sweeney was found innocent and quickly left the state for Tennessee. He later served several years for horse theft, but that's where his story ends. He mostly disappeared from history after murdering his great uncle.